The lawyer's certified letter said she'd inherited property in northern Arizona, but when Rachel Torres finally found the coordinates after 3 wrong turns down unmarked dirt roads, all she saw was a massive frozen crater that looked like God himself had punched a hole in the desert. The rim was covered in ice that shouldn't exist in Arizona, and at the center, half buried in crystalline frost, was a steel door that had been sealed for 40 years. What she found behind that door, locked beneath a meteorite impact site that scientists had written off as barren, would either destroy her completely or prove that sometimes the universe compensates for every injustice with interest. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The fluorescent lights of the convenience store where Rachel worked the graveyard shift flickered and hummed like dying insects. It was 3:47 in the morning on a Thursday, and she'd been on her feet for 9 hours straight. Her lower back screamed with every movement, and the compression bandage around her left ankle, sprained 2 weeks ago when she'd slipped on ice outside their apartment, had started to smell like sweat and desperation. She was 34 years old, but felt 60. The mirror behind the cigarette display showed a woman with dark circles so deep they looked like bruises, hair pulled back in a ponytail that hadn't been washed in 3 days, and a name tag that read Rachel in faded letters that matched her faded life. Her phone, tucked in her back pocket, buzzed with its 4th text of the night from her ex-husband Marcus. Each message was another variation of the same threat. Pay me what you owe, or I'm taking Lily. The courts will side with the stable parent. You can barely keep a roof over her head. Rachel deleted the message without responding. Engaging with Marcus only gave him ammunition, and she'd learned that lesson the hard way during their brutal divorce. He'd walked out 18 months ago after emptying their joint account, maxing out 3 credit cards in her name, and convincing the judge that Rachel's multiple jobs made her an unstable parent. The fact that she worked multiple jobs because Marcus had stolen everything somehow didn't matter to the family court system. A car pulled up outside, headlights cutting through the darkness. Rachel straightened, forcing her face into the customer service smile that had become as natural as breathing. A man in a business suit walked in, which was unusual for this hour. Most of her customers were truckers, night shift workers, or people who'd made bad decisions and needed cigarettes and energy drinks to cope with the consequences. This man looked different, professional, out of place. He carried a leather briefcase and had the kind of walk that suggested he'd never questioned whether he belonged somewhere. Rachel Torres, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Rachel replied carefully. Her guard went up immediately. Debt collectors had found her here before, process servers too. She'd gotten good at reading the signs. My name is David Wu. I'm an attorney with Morrison & Associates out of Flagstaff. I've been trying to reach you for 6 weeks. Your phone's been disconnected. Her cell service had been cut off 3 weeks ago. She'd kept the phone just for the clock and a few downloaded books she could read during her breaks. What do you want? She asked, already calculating if she needed to start looking for a new job, a new place to hide. I'm here about your uncle, Tomas Reyes. He passed away 4 months ago. Complications from pneumonia. I'm sorry for your loss. Rachel's mind stuttered over the name. Uncle Tomas. She hadn't thought about him in years, maybe 15 years. He'd been her father's older brother, the weird one nobody talked about. The one who'd moved to Arizona decades ago and supposedly gone crazy, living alone in the desert, obsessed with rocks and stars and things that fell from the sky. Her father had visited him once when Rachel was maybe 12, and had come back shaking his head, saying Tomas had lost his mind, that he lived like a hermit and talked about conspiracies and government cover-ups. After that, her family had written him off. Rachel had only vague memories of a quiet man with kind eyes who'd sent her a birthday card once with a picture of a meteorite on the front. I barely knew him, Rachel said. Why are you telling me this? You're named in his will as the sole beneficiary. He left you his property in Winslow, Arizona. It's about 43 acres surrounding what's known locally as the Reyes Impact Site. Rachel blinked. That was the last thing she'd expected to hear. Property meant value, potentially. Property meant she might be able to sell something, pay off some of the crushing debt Marcus had left her with, maybe even afford a lawyer to fight for better custody arrangements with Lily. What kind of property? Mr. Wu pulled a folder from his briefcase and laid out several pages on the counter between them. It's complicated. The land is classified as geologically significant due to a meteorite impact that occurred in 1962. Your uncle was the property owner at the time of the impact and maintained ownership until his death. The site has been studied extensively, but your uncle kept the area largely restricted. He lived on the property in what records describe as a research facility of his own design. Research facility, Rachel repeated slowly. What does that mean? Is there a house? There's a structure. I haven't personally seen it. The property is extremely remote, about 30 miles northeast of Winslow proper. No paved roads lead to it. Your uncle was reclusive, as I'm sure you're aware. The last inspection of the property for tax purposes was conducted in 1998, and even then, assessors noted difficulty accessing the site and reported that Mr. Reyes refused to allow interior inspection of his facility. Why would he leave it to me? We barely spoke. I was a child the last time I saw him. I can't speak to his motivations, but the will is clear and uncontested. The property is yours. However, there are complications you should be aware of. Of course there are, Rachel thought. There were always complications. What kind? The land is landlocked with access requiring permission to cross Federal Bureau of Land Management territory. There have been multiple purchase offers from mining companies and private collectors over the years, all refused by your uncle. There's also significant scientific interest in the impact site. Several universities have requested access for research, which your uncle also refused. And finally, there are questions about what exactly your uncle was doing on that property for the last 40 years. Questions from whom? Various parties. Government agencies concerned about unpermitted research. Companies interested in mineral rights. Scientists curious about the impact site and its potential contents. Your uncle was reportedly very protective of the crater and what he called his archive. Rachel's head spun. She'd expected maybe a small house she could sell or vacant land worth a few $1,000s. This sounded complicated, messy, potentially worthless, or potentially valuable in ways she couldn't understand. Can I sell it? Legally, yes. Practically, that might be difficult given the restrictions, the remoteness, and the questions surrounding what's actually on the property. I'd recommend visiting the site, conducting a proper assessment, before making any decisions. Mr. Wu pushed a manila envelope across the counter. The deed, keys to the gate and facility, GPS coordinates, and a letter your uncle left for you specifically. He was very insistent that letter be delivered directly to you and read only after you'd signed acceptance of the inheritance. Rachel picked up the envelope with hands that shook from exhaustion and adrenaline. Inside was paperwork that looked official and overwhelming. A set of old brass keys, a folded map with coordinates circled in red, and a sealed letter with her name written across it in handwriting she didn't recognize. Is there anything else I need to know? Mr. Wu hesitated, then said carefully, Your uncle maintained detailed records, but shared very little with outside parties. There are rumors, unsubstantiated ones, about what the impact site might contain. Meteorite fragments alone could be valuable, but Tomas claimed there was more, though he never specified what. Some people believe he was sitting on a fortune. Others think he was simply paranoid and eccentric. Either way, once word spreads that the property has a new owner, you may receive visitors and offers. I'd suggest being cautious about who you trust and what you agree to. The warning sent a chill down Rachel's spine, but she was too tired to fully process it. She thanked Mr. Wu, signed the papers accepting the inheritance, and watched him drive away into the pre-dawn darkness. Then she stood alone in the fluorescent-lit store, holding an envelope that weighed almost nothing but somehow felt impossibly heavy. She finished her shift at 6, drove home through streets just beginning to wake, and found Lily already awake in their tiny apartment. Her 7-year-old daughter sat at their second-hand table eating cereal, her dark hair tangled from sleep, her bright eyes the only thing in Rachel's life that still sparkled with hope and innocence. Morning, baby, Rachel said, dropping into the chair across from her. Morning, Mama. You look tired. I'm always tired, sweetheart. But it's okay. We're okay. Lily looked at her, with those two knowing eyes that children of struggling parents develop early. Then she went back to her cereal without pushing, without asking the questions Rachel could see forming behind those eyes. After Lily left for school, walking 3 blocks to catch the bus because Rachel couldn't afford the gas to drive her anymore, Rachel sat alone at the table and opened Tomas's letter. The handwriting was shaky but careful, the paper thick and yellowed. Dear Rachel, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've inherited something most people would call worthless. They're wrong. What I'm leaving you is worth more than I can explain in a letter, but it comes with responsibility and danger in equal measure. In 1962, a meteorite struck my property. The government came immediately, took samples, declared it scientifically interesting but not particularly valuable, and left me alone. What they missed, what nobody else understood, was that the impact created something unique. The heat and pressure of the collision formed a natural vault deep in the crater's core, sealed by the very rock that melted and reformed during impact. Inside that vault, protected from the elements and human interference, is something I've spent 40 years cataloging and protecting. I can't tell you exactly what it's worth in dollars, but conservative estimates, based on 1998 market values and the growing market for space materials, suggest the collection exceeds $400 million. That number is probably higher now. But more than the monetary value, what's in that vault represents scientific knowledge that certain parties would prefer remain hidden. Meteorites carry information about the formation of our solar system, about materials that don't exist naturally on Earth, about possibilities that challenge established understandings. I've documented everything, every fragment, every isotope reading, every unusual property, and I've kept it all sealed away because the world wasn't ready for it. Maybe it still isn't. But you, Rachel, you're strong in ways you don't realize yet. I've kept track of you from a distance. I know what Marcus did to you. I know how hard you've been fighting to keep your daughter safe and fed. I know you've been crushed by circumstances beyond your control. That ends now. Behind that frozen door at the center of the impact crater is everything I've protected. The ice isn't natural, by the way. I created it. A cooling system powered by geothermal energy from the impact site itself. The door won't open until the ice melts, and the ice won't melt until someone who truly needs what's inside arrives with the intention to protect it, not exploit it. I know that sounds insane. It did to me too, until I witnessed it. Some forces in this universe respond to human need and intention in ways science hasn't fully explained. Trust the process. Trust yourself. And when you open that vault, remember that wealth without purpose is just another form of poverty. Use what I've left you to build something better, not just for yourself, but for Lily, and maybe for all the people like us who've been told we don't matter. With respect and hope, your Uncle Tomas. Rachel read the letter 3 times. For $100 million. Meteorites. A frozen vault that wouldn't open until she needed it. It sounded completely insane, the fantasy of a man who'd lived alone too long and lost touch with reality. But the deed was real. The property was real. And Rachel had nothing left to lose. She called in sick to her afternoon shift at the call center. She couldn't afford to miss work, but she also couldn't afford to not investigate this. She packed a backpack with water, snacks, her phone with the downloaded GPS app that still worked offline, blankets, and the keys Tomas had left. Then she loaded Lily into their ancient Toyota after school and drove south toward Winslow, Arizona. "Baby, where are we going?" Lily asked as the city faded behind them and desert stretched ahead. "We're going to see something that belonged to your great Uncle Tomas. It's an adventure." "Is it far?" "About 4 hours. But we'll be okay. We have snacks and music." Rachel had downloaded Lily's favorite songs weeks ago when they'd still had Wi-Fi. Now those songs played through the car's crackling speakers as they drove through landscape that grew increasingly stark and beautiful. Red rocks, endless sky, the kind of emptiness that made you feel both insignificant and strangely free. They reached Winslow by evening. The town was small, the kind of place where everyone noticed strangers. Rachel stopped at a gas station to fill up and ask for directions. The attendant, a man in his 60s with weathered skin and suspicious eyes, studied her when she mentioned the Reyes property. "You related to old Tomas?" the man asked. "He was my uncle." The man's expression shifted to something between pity and concern. "That place, it's not easy to reach. Road's barely there anymore. Most folks gave up trying to visit Tomas years ago. He wanted it that way. Do you know how to get there?" "I have coordinates." The man pulled out a hand-drawn map and marked the route with a pencil that had been sharpened so many times it was barely a stub. "Take Highway 87 north for about 20 miles. Then you'll see a cattle gate with a faded sign that says, 'Private property, no trespassing.' That's the access road. It's rough, real rough. You'll need four-wheel drive for the last 10 miles. Rachel looked at her Toyota, which was barely holding together and definitely didn't have four-wheel drive. "Is there another way?" "Not unless you walk the last stretch. And I wouldn't recommend trying that with a child. It's desert. It's dangerous. Maybe come back in daylight with a better vehicle." But Rachel had already used her last tank of gas to get here. She didn't have money for a motel. She didn't have money for a rental car. She had momentum and desperation, and sometimes that was enough. "Thank you for your help," she said, paying for the gas with the last $20 bill in her wallet. The attendant watched them drive away with an expression Rachel couldn't quite read. They found the cattle gate just as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that looked like the end of the world or the beginning of something impossible. Rachel opened the gate, drove through, and started down a dirt road that was more suggestion than reality. The Toyota groaned and complained, bottoming out on rocks, sliding in sand, but somehow kept moving forward. Lily held tight to her seatbelt, eyes wide but not scared. She'd learned to trust her mother's ability to survive impossible situations. They'd lived through worse than a bumpy road. After an hour of crawling through darkness, lit only by headlights that barely penetrated the vast emptiness, Rachel saw something ahead that made her breath catch. A crater, massive and perfectly circular, its rim rising 30 feet above the desert floor, and covering the entire interior of the crater, reflecting the rising moon in ways that seemed to defy physics, was ice. Thick, crystalline, impossible ice in the middle of the Arizona desert. "Mama," Lily whispered. "Why is there ice?" "I don't know, baby, but we're going to find out." Rachel parked at the crater's edge and helped Lily out of the car. The temperature, which had been warm during the day, dropped suddenly near the ice. Rachel could see her breath. She pulled blankets around Lily, and together they approached the rim carefully. The crater was enormous, maybe 300 feet across and at least 50 feet deep. And at the very center, half buried in ice that glowed faintly blue in the moonlight, was a steel door. Not a natural formation, not rocks or debris, but an actual door with a heavy lock and a warning sign that Rachel could barely make out from this distance. Tomas had been right about everything. This place was real. The ice was real. And if those things were real, maybe the rest of his letter was real too. She pulled out the brass keys and studied them in the moonlight. One looked like it fit a padlock. Another was smaller, more intricate. The third was stamped with numbers that might be a combination. Getting down to that door would be treacherous. The crater walls were steep, and the ice made everything slippery. But Rachel had come too far to turn back now. She'd driven 400 miles on faith and desperation. She'd used her last money on gas. She'd put everything on the line for the chance that maybe, just maybe, the universe owed her something good. "Stay here, baby," Rachel said, helping Lily sit wrapped in blankets near the car. "I'm going to go down there and see if I can open that door." "Be careful, Mama." "Always, sweetheart." Rachel began the descent into the crater slowly, testing each foothold, using rocks and frozen debris as handholds. The ice was strange, not slippery like normal ice, but almost grippy, as if it understood she needed traction. She told herself that was insane, that ice couldn't understand anything, but she couldn't deny that every step held firm even when it shouldn't have. It took 20 minutes to reach the crater floor. By the time she got there, her hands were scraped and bleeding. Her ankle was screaming from the twisted landing she'd taken halfway down, and her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. The steel door was enormous up close, at least 6 feet wide and 7 feet tall, set in a rock that looked melted and reformed in ways that didn't seem natural. The sign on the door read, Reyes Impact Archive, authorized access only, in faded paint that had been there for decades. Rachel pulled out the first key and fitted it into the padlock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been oiled yesterday, instead of sitting and used for months. The lock clicked open and fell away. The second key fit into the door's main mechanism. Rachel turned it slowly, feeling resistance, then a deep clunk as tumblers aligned. The door remained closed. She tried pulling. Nothing. Then she noticed the keypad to the left of the door, number 0 through 9 in a grid that looked surprisingly modern compared to the rest of the door. The third key had numbers stamped into it. Rachel punched them in, her fingers numb from cold. 329672. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ice covering the door began to crack, not breaking, but melting, running off in streams that disappeared into the rocky ground. The door shuddered, released a hiss of pressurized air that smelled of metal and stone and something else Rachel couldn't identify, and slowly, impossibly, swung inward. Lights flickered on inside, automatic systems responding to the door's opening. Rachel stood frozen, staring into a corridor that descended deeper into the crater, into the heart of the impact site, into whatever her Uncle Tomas had protected for 40 years. The walls were smooth stone, the ceiling reinforced with metal beams. Emergency lights created a path that seemed to lead down forever. And from somewhere deep below, Rachel heard a sound like wind through caverns, like the earth itself breathing, waiting for someone to discover what it had been hiding. She turned to look up at the crater rim, where Lily sat wrapped in blankets, small and trusting and depending on her mother to make the right choice. She thought about Marcus and his threats, about her 3 jobs that barely paid for food, about the apartment they'd lose next month, about every person who'd ever made her feel small and powerless and worthless. Then she thought about Tomas's letter, about $400 million, about the phrase, wealth without purpose is just another form of poverty, about the possibility that maybe this time, just this once, the universe was offering her a chance to be something more than a victim of circumstances. Rachel pulled out her phone, turned on its flashlight, and took her first step into the corridor. The door stayed open behind her, the ice continuing to melt in streams that looked like tears, or maybe like the earth finally letting go of secrets it had carried too long. What she would find in the depths of that meteorite crater would change everything. But first, she had to be brave enough to descend into darkness with nothing but hope and her uncle's faith that she was stronger than she believed. The question that burned in her mind as she walked deeper wasn't whether the fortune was real. It was whether she'd be strong enough to protect it once she found it. Because Rachel had learned the hard way that sometimes the hardest part isn't getting something valuable. It's keeping it from people who think they have more right to it than you do. The corridor descended at a gentle angle, carved through rock that showed signs of extreme heat exposure. The walls were smooth, almost glassy in places, evidence of the tremendous energy that had been released when the meteorite struck. Rachel's footsteps echoed in the confined space, the sound swallowed by darkness ahead and behind. Emergency lights continued to flicker on as she moved, triggered by motion sensors that had somehow remained functional after all these years. She'd walked maybe 50 feet when she heard Lily's voice calling from above, small and frightened. "Mama? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby," Rachel called back, her voice echoing strangely. "I'll be right back. Stay where you are." "Okay, but hurry. It's scary out here alone." Rachel's heart clenched. She was terrified too, but terror was something she'd learned to function through. Being a single mother with no money and an ex-husband who wanted to take her child had taught her that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. You kept moving forward because stopping meant drowning. The corridor opened into a wider space, and Rachel found herself standing in what could only be described as an underground laboratory. The room was circular, maybe 30 feet across, with a ceiling that rose to a dome shape reinforced with metal struts. Equipment lined the walls, some of it recognizable as scientific instruments, microscopes and scales and measurement devices, but much of it completely foreign to her. Computers that looked decades old sat on heavy metal desks. Filing cabinets lined one entire wall, each drawer labeled with dates and codes Rachel didn't understand. And in the center of the room, sitting on a heavy stone pedestal like an altar, was a piece of meteorite the size of a basketball, dark and pitted and somehow beautiful in its alien strangeness. Rachel approached it slowly, her phone's flashlight beam playing across its surface. The rock seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and when she got close enough, she could feel heat radiating from it. Not intense heat, but warmth, like touching sun-heated stone on a summer day. Except this was underground, in a sealed chamber, and the meteorite had been sitting here for decades. How was it still warm? She reached out carefully, not quite touching it, and noticed something else. The air around the meteorite shimmered slightly, like heat waves rising from asphalt. And in that shimmer, she thought she could see colors that didn't quite exist, shades that her eyes struggled to process. A voice, Tomas's voice, suddenly filled the room. Rachel jumped, heart hammering, before realizing it was a recording triggered by her presence. If you're hearing this, the recording said, then you've made it past the door and you're standing in my primary research facility. Welcome, Rachel. I'm sorry I can't be there to explain everything in person, but time and circumstance have their own plans. What you're looking at is the central fragment of the meteorite that struck my property on August 17th, 1962. It's classified as a palisite, a type of meteorite that forms at the boundary between a planet's molten core and its rocky mantle. But this one is unique. Its composition includes elements that shouldn't exist in nature, isotopes that suggest it came from outside our solar system, perhaps from a stellar explosion billions of years ago. The recording paused, and Rachel heard papers rustling, as if Tomas was organizing his thoughts. For 40 years, I've studied this fragment and the thousands of smaller pieces scattered throughout the crater. I've documented their properties, their strange behaviors there, potential applications. And I've kept it all secret because powerful people, governments, corporations, private collectors, they all want to control materials like this. They want to weaponize them, profit from them, lock them away in vaults where only the wealthy can benefit. The recording's tone grew harder, angrier. I won't let that happen. This material represents knowledge that belongs to humanity, not to the highest bidder. In a vault below this laboratory, you'll find my complete collection. Over 6,000 meteorite fragments, categorized and documented. Based on current market rates for rare space materials, particularly palladites with unusual compositions, the collection is worth approximately $486 million. But here's what's more important than the money. Rachel's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the stone floor, phone clutched in shaking hands. $486 million. The number was so large it had no meaning. It was more money than she could conceive of, more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes of working 3 jobs. The recording continued, unaware of her shock. The vault is sealed with the same thermal lock as the exterior door. It will open when it senses human presence combined with genuine need. Not greed, not curiosity, but actual need. I don't understand the mechanism completely. I think the meteorite itself, the main fragment here, somehow powers and controls the locks. It responds to intention, to desperation, to the kind of raw human need that can't be faked. You're in that corridor because you need what's inside. I know that. I've kept track of your struggles. I know Marcus destroyed your finances and tried to take Lily. I know you've been working yourself to death just to survive. That ends now. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Tomas had known. He'd been watching from a distance, understanding, preparing for this moment. When you're ready to enter the vault, the recording said, descend the stairs at the far end of this chamber. They'll lead you down another level to the storage facility. Everything is cataloged in the filing cabinets here. Take your time. Study the documentation. Understand what you have before you make any decisions about what to do with it. And Rachel, one more thing. People will come. The moment word gets out that the property has a new owner, they'll come with offers and threats and legal maneuvers designed to separate you from what's yours. Trust very few people. Protect yourself and Lily first. Everything else is secondary. The recording clicked off, leaving Rachel alone with the sound of her own breathing and the faint hum of equipment that had been running for 40 years on power sources she couldn't identify. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes, and walked to the filing cabinets. The first drawer she opened was labeled Fragment Catalog 1962 to 1970. Inside were hundreds of pages of handwritten notes, photographs of meteorite pieces, chemical analyses, weight measurements, descriptions of unusual properties. Tomas had documented everything with scientific precision and artistic care. Each fragment had a number, a photograph from multiple angles, detailed measurements, and notes about its specific characteristics. Some fragments showed normal meteorite properties. Others were noted as anomalous, requires further study, or potential commercial application unclear. The deeper Rachel dug into the files, the more she understood the scope of what Tomas had created. This wasn't just a collection of valuable rocks. This was a lifetime of scientific work, a comprehensive survey of meteorite materials that probably had no equal anywhere in the world. She pulled out a folder labeled Market Valuation, Confidential, and found documents dated from different years showing how Tomas had tracked the growing market for meteorite materials. In 1962, the collection had been worth maybe $50,000. By 1980, that had grown to $3 million. By 2000, $40 million. The most recent valuation, dated just 6 months before Tomas's death, estimated the total value at $486 million, with a note that said conservative estimate does not account for unique specimens that may command premium prices from institutional buyers. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text notification that must have been delayed. Signal was spotty this far from civilization. The message was from Marcus. I know you inherited something. My lawyer says I'm entitled to half of any assets acquired during our marriage. We'll see you in court. She stared at the message, feeling rage build in her chest like pressure in a sealed container. Marcus had taken everything from her already. He'd stolen their savings, destroyed her credit, and then tried to claim she was unfit to parent their daughter. Now he wanted to take this too, wanted to claim half of what Tomas had specifically left to Rachel to help her escape the situation Marcus had created. Not this time, Rachel whispered to the empty chamber. Not ever again. She descended the stairs at the far end of the laboratory, phone flashlight beam cutting through darkness that seemed to swallow light. These stairs were steeper, carved directly from the crater's rock, and they spiraled down for what felt like forever. Her legs ached. Her twisted ankle sent jolts of pain with every step. But she kept moving because at the bottom of these stairs was something worth more than she'd ever imagined having. And she needed to see it, needed to know it was real before the world tried to take it away from her. The vault door appeared suddenly, a massive circular seal set into the rock face like something from a science fiction movie. It was easily 8 feet in diameter, made of steel that looked polished despite decades underground. And just like the exterior door, it was covered in ice, thick crystalline frost that shouldn't exist this far below ground. Rachel approached carefully and placed her hand against the ice. It was cold, shockingly so, but the moment her palm made contact, she felt something shift. The ice began to glow faintly, blue light pulsing outward from where she touched it. Then, just like before, it started to melt. Water ran down in rivulets that disappeared into channels carved in the floor. The vault door shuddered, metal grinding against metal, and slowly, impossibly, began to turn. It took a full minute for the door to complete its rotation, and when it finally swung open, releasing air that smelled of stone and ozone and something indefinably alien, Rachel stepped into a space that stole her breath completely. The vault was enormous, a natural cavern that had been enlarged and shaped by the meteorite's impact. The ceiling rose at least 40 feet above her head, supported by the same glassy melted rock she'd seen in the corridor, and covering every available surface, arranged on metal shelving units that must have taken years to install, were meteorite fragments. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. Each one sat in its own labeled container, clear plastic or glass cases that protected the specimens while allowing them to be viewed. The smallest fragments were no bigger than Rachel's thumbnail. The largest were the size of car tires. And every single one was cataloged with a number that corresponded to Tomas's filing system. But that wasn't what made Rachel's knees buckle. What made her sink to the floor in shock was the beauty of it. Under the vault's lighting system, which flickered on automatically when she entered, the meteorites gleamed with colors she'd never seen before. Some were dark and plain, like the rocks she'd pass on any desert road. But others, the pallasites especially, were windows into alien worlds. She could see crystals embedded in metal matrices, olivine and pyroxene and minerals she couldn't name, creating patterns that looked like stained glass or frozen fire. The light caught in them and scattered in ways that made the whole vault shimmer like a cathedral built from the bones of dead stars. Rachel stood slowly, walked to the nearest shelf, and picked up a specimen at random. The label read Fragment 1847, Pallasite with high olivine content, 347 grams. Estimated value $180,000. She set it down carefully and picked up another. Fragment 2334, Iron Meteorite with Widmanstatin patterns, 892 grams. Estimated value $95,000. Another. Fragment 4521, Carbonaceous Chondrite with organic compounds, 124 grams. Estimated value $650,000. The numbers were staggering. She was holding hundreds of thousands of dollars in her hands, and this was just 3 fragments out of thousands. She moved through the vault in a daze, reading labels, staring at specimens, trying to wrap her mind around the reality that all of this was hers. That her uncle had spent 40 years assembling and protecting this collection specifically so that someday, when she needed it most, it would save her. In the center of the vault, on a raised platform that reminded Rachel of an altar, sat a meteorite fragment unlike any of the others. It was the size of a microwave, roughly cubic in shape, and it glowed. Not brightly, but with a faint phosphorescence that pulsed in a rhythm that almost seemed like breathing. The label beside it read, Prime Fragment, Origin Unknown, Composition Anomalous, Not for Sale, Value Incalculable. Rachel approached it slowly, drawn by something she couldn't name. The closer she got, the warmer the air became, and she realized the glow was intensifying in response to her presence. When she was close enough to touch it, the fragment pulsed once, brightly, and Rachel felt something pass through her. Not painful, but profound, like recognition or acknowledgement. Like the meteorite was seeing her, understanding her need, and accepting her as its guardian. She stood there for a long time, hand hovering over the glowing rock, feeling tears stream down her face. This was real. All of it was real. She wasn't dreaming or hallucinating or being cruelly pranked. She'd inherited a fortune beyond measure. And more importantly, she'd inherited proof that she mattered, that someone had believed she was worth saving, that the universe sometimes did balance its scales. "Mama," Lily's voice called from far above, thin and frightened. "Mama, where are you?" "I'm coming, baby," Rachel called back, her voice echoing through the vault. "I'll be right there." She forced herself to leave the vault, to climb back up the stairs that seemed steeper and longer than before. Her body was exhausted, running on adrenaline and hope and the shock of discovery. By the time she emerged from the corridor into the crater's cold night air, her legs were shaking so badly she could barely climb the crater wall. Lily ran to her the moment Rachel pulled herself over the rim, small arms wrapping around her mother's waist. "I was so scared," Lily said, crying into Rachel's shirt. "You were gone so long, and it's dark and I heard weird sounds." "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. But I'm here now, and everything is going to be okay. Better than okay." Lily pulled back to look at her mother's face. "Did you find something?" Rachel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She pulled her daughter close and just held her, breathing in the smell of her hair, feeling her heartbeat, grounding herself in the reality of this child who'd kept her fighting through every impossible moment of the last 18 months. They slept in the car that night, wrapped in blankets, too exhausted and overwhelmed to drive back to Winslow. Rachel held Lily and stared up through the windshield at stars that suddenly seemed more meaningful, more connected to her life. Somewhere up there, billions of years ago, a star had died in an explosion that sent material flying through space. Some of that material had eventually coalesced into planets and asteroids. And one piece of one asteroid had found its way to Earth, to Arizona, to property that happened to be owned by a man who understood its value and protected it for decades until his niece, broke and desperate and fighting for survival, needed it enough to make ice melt and doors open. The universe worked in ways that seemed designed to break you until suddenly, impossibly, they worked to save you. Morning came cold and bright. Rachel's phone, which had been nearly dead, somehow had enough battery for her to take photographs. She spent 2 hours documenting everything. The crater, the ice, the exterior door, the laboratory, the vault, and dozens of meteorite specimens. She photographed Tomas's filing cabinets, his notes, the equipment, everything. If people were going to try to take this from her, she needed proof of what it was and that it belonged to her. By the time they started the rough drive back to Winslow, Rachel had a plan forming. First, she needed to secure the property properly, change locks, install security if possible. Second, she needed legal help, a lawyer who could protect her rights and fight off Marcus's inevitable challenges. Third, she needed the collection properly authenticated and appraised by experts who could document its value in ways that would hold up in court. And fourth, eventually, she needed to figure out what she actually wanted to do with $486 million in meteorite fragments. They reached Winslow by afternoon. Rachel stopped at the same gas station, and the attendant who'd given her directions yesterday took one look at her face and nodded slowly. "You found it," he said. "Whatever Tomas left you, you found it. Is it that obvious? You look like someone who just walked into their future. That's a specific look. People don't see it often, but when they do, it changes them." Rachel bought water and snacks with the last few dollars in her wallet, then asked a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. "Did people ever ask about my uncle's property? About what might be on it?" "All the time," the attendant said. "Geologists, collectors, government types. They'd come through asking questions, trying to get directions, offering money for information. Tomas knew. That's why he kept everything locked up tight. He didn't trust anyone. You should probably do the same." "Who should I trust?" The attendant thought about it, then pulled out a business card from behind the register. "Dr. Elena Vasquez. She runs the geology department at Northern Arizona University. She and Tomas corresponded for years. She's one of the few people he respected. If you need someone who understands what you've inherited and won't try to steal it, she's your best bet." Rachel took the card gratefully. "Thank you. For the directions, for the advice, for not asking questions I can't answer yet." The attendant smiled. Tomas was a good man who got dealt a bad hand by people who wanted to take from him instead of learn from him. "I hope you have better luck." "So do I," Rachel said. "God, so do I." They drove straight through to Phoenix, which took 4 hours of Lily sleeping in the back seat, while Rachel's mind raced with plans and fears and possibilities. She used a gas station Wi-Fi to email Dr. Vasquez, explaining who she was and that she needed to discuss Tomas's collection. The response came within an hour. "I've been waiting for this email for years. When can we meet?" Dr. Elena Vasquez was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that suggested she didn't suffer fools. She met Rachel at a coffee shop near the university the next morning after Rachel had spent the night in her car because she still couldn't afford a motel. Lily colored at the table while Rachel spread out photographs on her phone, letting Elena swipe through them with an expression that went from interest to shock to something like awe. "Tomas actually did it," Elena whispered. "He cataloged the entire impact site. Every fragment, every specimen. This is the most comprehensive meteorite collection I've ever seen. Do you understand what you have here?" "I understand it's worth a lot of money," Rachel said carefully. "It's worth more than money. This is scientific data that could revolutionize our understanding of solar system formation, of planetary core composition, of material science. That prime fragment you photographed, the glowing one, I'd bet my reputation that's never been documented before. The isotope ratios in a specimen like that could tell us things about stellar nucleosynthesis that we've only theorized. Rachel's head spun with terminology she barely understood. But what Elena said next cut through the technical language with perfect clarity. There are people who will try to take this from you. Collectors who want to own unique pieces. Companies that want to exploit the material for profit. Even governments that might claim eminent domain if they decide the scientific importance outweighs private property rights. You need protection, and you need it before anyone else finds out what you have. Can you help me? Rachel asked, hating how desperate she sounded. Elena studied her for a long moment. Tomas told me about you, she said finally. About 5 years ago, when he was updating his will. He said he had a niece who'd been dealt an unfair hand, who was fighting battles she shouldn't have to fight alone, who deserved a chance to prove that strength wasn't about never being knocked down, but about getting back up. He asked me to help you if you ever made contact. So yes, I'll help. But you need to understand what you're getting into. That collection is going to change your life in ways you can't imagine yet, and not all of those changes will be comfortable. I'm already uncomfortable, Rachel said quietly. I've been uncomfortable for 18 months. What I need is a chance to stop drowning. Then let's get you that chance. Elena pulled out her phone and made a series of calls right there in the coffee shop, speaking quickly in a mix of English and Spanish. By the time she hung up, she'd arranged meetings with 3 different parties. A lawyer who specialized in property rights and inheritance law, an independent appraiser who worked with major museums and could provide authentication that would stand up in court, and a security company that had experience protecting high-value geological sites. We start tomorrow, Elena said. Tonight, you're staying with me. My spare room is yours for as long as you need it. I can't pay you, Rachel said, her voice breaking. I have maybe $40 left and 3 jobs I've been missing shifts for. I don't need payment. I need to make sure Tomas's life work ends up in the hands of someone who will honor it. You're that person. He chose well. That night, sleeping in a real bed for the first time in weeks, with Lily safe beside her and the promise of help finally materializing, Rachel let herself cry. Not from fear or exhaustion or despair, but from relief so profound it felt like drowning in reverse, like being pulled out of deep water and remembering how to breathe. The next 3 days were a blur of meetings and discoveries. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Morrison, reviewed the inheritance documents and immediately filed paperwork to protect Rachel's ownership of the property against any claims from Marcus or anyone else. She explained that because Tomas had set up the inheritance specifically to pass to Rachel after his death, and because the collection existed before Rachel's marriage, there was no legal basis for Marcus to claim any portion of it. But, Patricia warned, that won't stop him from trying. Men like your ex-husband don't operate on logic. They operate on entitlement and rage. We'll fight him, and we'll win, but it's going to be ugly. The appraiser, Dr. James Chun, drove out to the crater site with Rachel, Elena, and a team of assistants. He spent 12 hours in the vault, photographing, measuring, conducting non-invasive chemical analyses, cross-referencing specimens with databases of known meteorites. When he finally emerged, dusty and exhausted, and looking like he'd witnessed something miraculous, he sat Rachel down and gave her numbers that made her previous understanding of wealth completely obsolete. Conservative estimate, he said, based on current market rates for meteorite materials, authenticated specimens, and the unique nature of several pieces, including that prime fragment, you're looking at $486 million minimum. Potentially as high as $700 million if the right buyers compete for the rare specimens. But here's what you need to understand. The prime fragment alone, if it proves to be extraterrestrial in origin and contains isotopes we haven't documented before, could be worth more than everything else combined. Museums would pay any price for it. So would private collectors. So would governments. You're not just sitting on a fortune. You're sitting on materials that could reshape entire fields of scientific study. Rachel sat in the dust outside the crater, listening to numbers that had lost all meaning. 700 million. That was generational wealth. That was never worry about money again. That was Lily going to any college she wanted, and Rachel never working 3 jobs, and maybe, possibly, Rachel being able to do something good in the world beyond just surviving it. but it was also a target painted on her back. The moment this became public knowledge, she would become a person people wanted to exploit, manipulate, or destroy. "Are you okay?" Elena asked, sitting beside her. "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "This morning I was a broke single mom who worked at a convenience store. Now I'm worth $500 million. How am I supposed to process that?" "You don't process it all at once. You take it one step at a time. Right now, we focus on securing everything legally and physically. Then we figure out what you want to do with it." "What does that mean?" "It means you have options. You could sell the entire collection to a museum or university. You could keep it and develop the site as a research facility. You could sell pieces individually to maximize value. Or you could do something no one expects and create something entirely new. The choice is yours." That's what Tomas wanted you to have: choice and power and the freedom to decide your own future. The security installation took 2 days. The company Elena recommended brought in specialists who installed cameras, motion sensors, reinforced locks, and a communication system that would alert Rachel and local authorities if anyone tried to access the property without permission. It cost $30,000, money Rachel didn't have, but Patricia arranged for it to be paid from an advance against the collection's value once formal authentication was complete. "You're investing in protection," Patricia explained. "That's not an expense. It's insurance against theft that would cost you millions." By the end of the week, Rachel's life had transformed in ways that still felt unreal. She had legal representation that could stand up to Marcus's threats. She had scientific validation of the collection's value. She had security protecting the site. And she had people, Elena and Patricia and Dr. Chun, and even the gas station attendant in Winslow, who believed in her right to keep what Tomas had left her. But the threats came anyway, exactly as everyone had predicted. The first was a letter delivered to Elena's address, where Rachel was still staying. It was from a company called Strategic Mineral Acquisitions, offering to buy the entire collection for $200 million, payment within 30 days, no questions asked. The offer seemed generous until Patricia pointed out that it was less than half the collection's actual value, and that Strategic Mineral Acquisitions was a shell company owned by a billionaire collector known for buying rare geological specimens and locking them away in private vaults where no one else could study them. "They're betting you don't know the real value and that you're desperate enough to take quick money," Patricia said. "Don't respond. Let them wonder." The second threat was more direct. Marcus showed up at Elena's house 3 days after Rachel had returned from securing the crater site. He pounded on the door at 7 in the morning, screaming about his rights and demanding to see his daughter. Elena called the police while Rachel stayed inside with Lily, who'd gone pale and quiet the way children do when they see a parent they once loved transform into something frightening. The police escorted Marcus away with a warning, but not before he shouted loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear that Rachel had stolen his inheritance and that he'd take her to court for every penny. Inside, Rachel held Lily while her daughter cried. "I don't want to see him," Lily said. "He's scary now. He wasn't always scary, but now he is." "I know, baby. You don't have to see him. I promise." "How can you promise that?" "He said he'd take me." "Because I'm not powerless anymore," Rachel said quietly. "I have resources now. I have help. And I'm not going to let him hurt us ever again." The third threat came from an unexpected source. A man in an expensive suit appeared at the crater site, somehow bypassing the security to knock on the steel door while Rachel was inside doing inventory. She opened the door carefully, camera recording on her phone, to find someone who introduced himself as Dr. Richard Garrett from the Department of the Interior. "We've had reports of a significant meteorite collection on federal adjacent land," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "There are concerns about proper permitting, environmental impact, and whether materials found on American soil should be held privately or transferred to public institutions for the benefit of all citizens. This is private property," Rachel said, keeping her voice steady. "The meteorite struck land my uncle owned. Everything here belongs to me legally." Dr. Garrett's smile tightened. "Legal ownership is complicated when we're talking about materials of national scientific importance. The department could make a case for eminent domain. We could claim the collection represents a strategic resource. Or, and his tone turned friendly again. You could work with us voluntarily. Donate key specimens to the Smithsonian, allow federal researchers access, and in return receive tax benefits and the gratitude of the scientific community. What you mean, Rachel said, is you want me to give away the most valuable pieces of my inheritance for free while you and your department take credit for preserving them. Am I understanding correctly? Dr. Garrett's mask slipped slightly. We're trying to help you navigate a complex situation. A woman with your background, your financial situation, you're not equipped to manage something this significant. There will be challenges, legal battles, people who question your judgment. Whereas if you work with established institutions, everything becomes simpler. Rachel felt rage build in her chest, the same rage she'd felt every time Marcus had called her stupid or incapable, every time a bill collector had talked to her like she was trash, every time the system had treated her like she didn't matter. I think you should leave my property, she said quietly. Now, Dr. Garrett didn't move. You're making a mistake. I'm giving you the opportunity to comply before this becomes adversarial. It's already adversarial. You came to my private property without permission, implied my inheritance should be taken from me, and suggested I'm too stupid to manage my own affairs. That's not help. That's intimidation dressed up as concern. Now get out before I call the sheriff and have you charged with trespassing. He left, but not before handing her a card and saying, "You'll regret this." People who don't cooperate with federal interests tend to find life getting very difficult. Rachel watched him drive away, then called Patricia immediately. "We have a problem," she said, and explained the visit. Patricia swore creatively. The Department of the Interior has been trying to expand government control over meteorite finds for years. They see this as a test case. If they can force you to donate the collection, they set precedent for claiming all significant meteorite strikes are national property. We fight back. How? By going public before they can. We control the narrative. We show that you're a responsible steward of the collection, that you're willing to work with legitimate scientists, that you understand the significance of what you have. We make you sympathetic and them look like bullies. Are you sure that's wise? Making this public means everyone knows what I have. Everyone already knows, Rachel. The question is whether they hear your story or someone else's version of it. Let's make sure they hear yours. The press conference was held at Northern Arizona University 3 days later. Patricia had arranged everything with military precision, inviting carefully selected journalists, science reporters, and representatives from major museums. Elena stood beside Rachel as moral support, while Dr. Chun presented the authentication findings. And Rachel, wearing borrowed professional clothes because she owned nothing appropriate for facing cameras, told her story to a room full of strangers who would decide whether she was worthy of what she'd inherited. She started at the beginning, not with the meteorite, but with Marcus, with the betrayal, the stolen money, the 3 jobs, the nights sleeping in her car with Lily. She talked about desperation and exhaustion and what it felt like to be told repeatedly that you didn't matter, that you were worthless, that you deserved everything bad that happened to you. Then she talked about the letter from the lawyer, the drive to Arizona, the frozen door that opened when she needed it most. And finally, she talked about Tomas, about a man who'd spent 40 years protecting something precious specifically so that when his niece needed saving, she'd have the tools to save herself. My uncle didn't just leave me meteorites, Rachel said, her voice steady despite the cameras. He left me proof that I was worth believing in, that I was capable of protecting something valuable, that my struggles didn't define my worth. And now I'm being told by powerful people that I should give away what he left me, that I'm not qualified to be the steward of this collection, that it should belong to institutions or the government or anyone except the person my uncle specifically chose. She paused, looking directly at the cameras. I'm here to say that's not going to happen. This collection will be shared with scientists and researchers and anyone who wants to learn from it. But it will be shared on my terms, in ways that honor my uncle's work and his wishes, not surrendered to people who think wealth and power give them the right to take what belongs to someone else. The room erupted with questions. Rachel answered what she could, deflected what she couldn't, and let Patricia and Elena handle the technical details. By the time the conference ended, the story was everywhere. National news picked it up. Social media exploded with people taking sides, some supporting Rachel's right to keep her inheritance, others arguing that scientifically significant materials should be public property. Within 24 hours, Rachel Torres went from being invisible to being the center of a national debate about property rights, scientific access, and whether poor people deserved to keep valuable inheritances. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages flooded the university's contact system, some supportive, others threatening. Rachel received offers from collectors willing to pay premium prices for individual specimens. She received threats from people who thought she was selfish for not immediately donating everything to museums. She received interview requests from every major media outlet. And she received a formal legal notice from Marcus's lawyer demanding emergency custody of Lily on the grounds that Rachel's new circumstances created an unstable environment for a child. That last one hurt worst of all, the idea that finally having money somehow made her a worse parent than when she'd been broke and desperate. Patricia fought the custody challenge with evidence that Marcus had abandoned his daughter, stolen from his wife, and was now attempting to use the legal system to access wealth he had no claim to. The judge, a woman who'd clearly seen this pattern before, denied the emergency motion and suggested Marcus's lawyer might want to reconsider filing frivolous claims. But the victory fell hollow because Rachel knew Marcus wouldn't stop. He'd keep trying, keep pushing, keep making her life difficult out of spite and greed. The difference now was that she had resources to fight back and lawyers who would fight for her. 2 weeks after the press conference, Rachel made a decision that surprised everyone. She announced the formation of the Tomas Reyes Foundation for Meteorite Research and Education. The foundation would maintain the collection, make it available for scientific study, and create educational programs to teach children from underprivileged backgrounds about space science and geology. A portion of the collection's value would be donated to institutions that agreed to name scholarships after Tomas. And Rachel would serve as director, overseeing everything while learning from experts like Elena how to be a proper steward of scientific materials. It's not about the money, Rachel told the gathered press at the foundation's announcement. It's about using what I've been given to create opportunities for other people who've been told they don't matter. My uncle gave me a chance. I want to give that chance to others. The announcement shifted public opinion dramatically. People who'd criticized her for not immediately donating everything had to confront the reality that she was creating something more sustainable than a one-time gift. The foundation structure meant the collection would be preserved and accessible for generations, not just acquired by one institution and potentially hidden away in storage. Critics found it harder to attack a single mother who was turning her inheritance into educational opportunities for children like hers. But not everyone was pleased. Strategic Mineral Acquisitions increased their offer to $300 million for the entire collection, contingent on immediate sale and transfer of all materials. The Department of the Interior launched an investigation into whether the meteorite fragments had been properly reported when found, suggesting potential violations of federal antiquities laws. And Marcus, faced with the reality that Rachel wasn't giving away or selling the collection, filed a lawsuit claiming that Tomas had been mentally incompetent when he'd written his will and that the inheritance should be invalidated. Each attack required resources to defend against, time Rachel didn't have, energy she couldn't spare. Patricia assured her they'd win every challenge, but the stress was crushing. Rachel found herself waking at 3 in the morning with panic attacks, her body remembering months of working night shifts and never sleeping enough. Lily, who'd thrived in the stability of living with Elena and attending a good school, started having nightmares about her father taking her away. And Rachel, despite having more money than she'd ever imagined, felt more trapped than when she'd been broke. At least poverty was a problem she understood. This was different, more complex, more dangerous in ways that weren't just about survival. Elena found her one night sitting outside the crater, staring at the stars. Rachel had driven out alone after putting Lily to bed, needing space to think, to breathe, to remember why she was fighting so hard. You're not alone in this, Elena said, sitting beside her on the cold ground. You know that, right? I feel alone, Rachel admitted. I feel like I'm drowning again, just in a different ocean. The water's nicer, but I'm still drowning. That's normal. You went from having nothing to having everything. That kind of transition breaks people sometimes. But you're not broken. You're just adjusting. How do you know I'm not broken? Because broken people don't create foundations. They don't think about education and opportunity. They don't share what they have. They hoard it or sell it or run away from the responsibility. You're doing the hard thing, the right thing, even though it hurts. Rachel thought about that. She thought about Tomas, alone in the desert for 40 years, protecting his collection from people who wanted to exploit it. She thought about the strength that took, the loneliness, the determination required to stand against pressure year after year. He'd done it for 4 decades. She'd been fighting for less than a month. If he could endure that long, she could endure this. The Foundation's first official event was held 6 weeks after Rachel had opened the frozen door. It was a small gathering, just 30 students from Phoenix area schools that serve low-income communities, along with their teachers and parents. Elena and Dr. Chun led tours of the vault, explaining how meteorites formed, where they came from, what scientists could learn from them. The children's faces filled with wonder at seeing materials from space, at touching rocks older than Earth itself, reminded Rachel why this mattered. One girl, maybe 9 years old, with dark hair and shy eyes that reminded Rachel of Lily, asked a question that made Rachel's throat tight. Are these really worth millions of dollars? Yes, Rachel said, kneeling to the girl's level. They are. Then why are you showing them to us? Shouldn't they be locked away where they're safe? They're safer when people know about them and care about them, Rachel explained. My uncle spent 40 years hiding these because he didn't trust anyone. But hiding things doesn't protect them. It just makes them lonely. I want these meteorites to be seen and studied and loved. I want kids like you to know that space is real and touchable and that science isn't just for rich people in fancy labs. It's for anyone curious enough to ask questions. The girl smiled, then asked another question. Can I be a scientist when I grow up, even though we're poor? Especially because you're poor, Rachel said. Because you understand what it's like to be overlooked. And the world needs scientists who remember what that feels like. The event was covered by local news, and the footage of children examining meteorites while scientists explained stellar nucleosynthesis and planetary formation went viral in the wholesome corner of the internet. Donations started coming in, small amounts mostly $5 here, $20 there, from people who wanted to support the Foundation's educational mission. It wasn't nearly enough to fund operations long term, but it was something else, proof that people believed in what Rachel was building. But success brought its own dangers. 3 weeks after the student event, the crater site was broken into. Someone had cut through the security fence, disabled cameras, and attempted to breach the vault door. They'd failed, the thermal lock holding firm, but they'd left behind evidence of sophisticated equipment and professional planning. This wasn't some amateur hoping to grab a valuable rock. This was an organized attempt to steal from the collection. The sheriff's investigation turned up very little. No fingerprints, no clear security footage, no witnesses in an area so remote that neighbors were measured in miles. But Patricia found something interesting in her research. Strategic Mineral Acquisitions had hired a security consultant 3 weeks prior, someone with a background in corporate espionage and asset recovery. The timing was suspicious, though not provable in court. They're getting desperate, Patricia said during an emergency meeting at Elena's house. They've tried legal pressure, financial incentives, and intimidation. Now they're trying theft. The next step is personal attacks. They'll dig into your past, look for anything embarrassing or compromising, try to destroy your reputation so the public stops supporting you. Let them dig, Rachel said, surprised by how calm she felt. I've been poor, betrayed, and publicly humiliated. There's nothing in my past worse than what people already know. That's not entirely true, Patricia said carefully. There's Lily's custody situation. If they can make you look like an unfit parent, they can pressure you through your daughter. Marcus has already tried that, and he'll try again, especially if someone offers him money or legal support to pursue custody more aggressively. Think about it from their perspective. You won't sell, won't donate, won't cooperate. But if you lost custody of Lily, if you were fighting to get your daughter back, you might be willing to liquidate assets to fund a legal battle. They could acquire the collection for pennies while you're desperate. The thought made Rachel's blood run cold. She'd survived poverty, survived Marcus's betrayal, survived threats and pressure and exhaustion. But losing Lily? That would break her in ways nothing else could. We need to get ahead of this, Patricia continued. File for full custody ourselves. Document everything Marcus has done. Create a record that shows you're not just a fit parent, but an excellent one. Make it costly for him to challenge you. How we do that? Marcus is Lily's father. Courts are supposed to consider both parents. Courts are supposed to consider the child's best interests, Patricia corrected. And Lily's best interests are clearly served by staying with a parent who's been present, supportive, and stable. We document your new situation, your financial stability, the foundation's educational mission that gives Lily opportunities she'd never have otherwise. We interview teachers, counselors, anyone who can testify to Lily's well-being in your care. And we make it clear that any custody challenge is motivated by greed, not parental concern. The process took 3 weeks and was emotionally exhausting. Rachel had to relive Marcus's abandonment, his theft, the months of struggling to survive while he disappeared. She had to let strangers interview Lily about whether she felt safe with her mother, whether she wanted to see her father, whether she understood what was happening. And she had to confront the reality that Marcus, who'd shown no interest in his daughter for 18 months, was now suddenly claiming to be a devoted father denied access to his child. The preliminary custody hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in Phoenix. Marcus showed up in an expensive suit Rachel knew he couldn't afford, flanked by lawyers who clearly represented someone else's interests. Patricia had warned her this would happen, that strategic mineral acquisitions or someone similar would fund Marcus's legal fight in exchange for his cooperation in pressuring Rachel. Marcus's lawyer painted a picture of Rachel as someone overwhelmed by sudden wealth, distracted by media attention and business obligations, unable to provide Lily with a stable home environment. He presented evidence of Rachel's grueling work schedule from before the inheritance, suggesting a pattern of neglect. He questioned whether someone with no business experience or scientific background should be managing a foundation, implying her judgment was questionable. And he suggested that Marcus, who now had steady employment and a stable home, could provide Lily with normalcy and routine that Rachel's chaotic new life couldn't offer. Patricia dismantled every argument with precision. She presented testimony from Lily's teachers showing dramatic improvement in her grades and emotional well-being since living with Rachel and Elena. She showed bank records proving Marcus had never paid $1 in child support despite court orders. She entered evidence of the theft Marcus had committed, the debts he'd left Rachel with, the complete absence of contact with his daughter for 18 months. And she played a video message from Lily herself, recorded with court approval, where the 7-year-old said clearly and calmly that she wanted to stay with her mama, that she didn't want to see her daddy because he'd been mean and scary, that she felt safe now and didn't want that to change. The judge, the same woman who denied Marcus's emergency custody motion, listened to everything with an expression that gave away nothing. Then she made a ruling that sent relief flooding through Rachel's body like warm water. Mr. Torres, the judge said, addressing Marcus directly, you abandoned your daughter for 18 months. You stole from your wife, destroyed her credit, and made no effort to support your child financially or emotionally. Now, conveniently timed with your ex-wife's inheritance, you claim to be a devoted father. This court is not impressed. Full physical custody remains with Ms. Torres. You may request supervised visitation if you can demonstrate consistent employment and parental engagement over the next 6 months, but I'm not optimistic about your chances. This case is closed unless circumstances change dramatically. Marcus's face went red with rage. He started to argue, but his lawyer pulled him back, whispering urgently. They left the courtroom quickly, Marcus shooting Rachel a look of pure hatred that made her flinch despite the victory. Outside, Patricia hugged her carefully. That was decisive. He can appeal, but it won't succeed. Lily is safe with you. Rachel couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face, relief making her dizzy. Lily was safe. That was all that mattered. Everything else, the collection, the foundation, the threats and pressure, all of it was secondary to that one fact. Her daughter was safe. But the victory was short-lived. 2 days later, a front-page article appeared in a national newspaper questioning the legitimacy of Rachel's foundation. The piece, clearly sourced from someone with inside knowledge, suggested that the Tomas Reyes Foundation was a tax shelter designed to hide wealth rather than a legitimate charitable organization. It claimed Rachel was paying herself an excessive salary, that the foundation's educational programs were minimal, that the real purpose was to maintain private control of valuable materials while enjoying tax benefits. The article quoted anonymous experts, suggesting Rachel lacked the qualifications to manage such a significant collection and that proper stewardship required institutional oversight. Every claim was false or misleading. The foundation's tax filings were public and showed Rachel took a modest salary, well below what a director of a comparable organization would earn. The educational programs were just beginning and would expand as funding allowed. And the real experts, the ones willing to put their names on statements, supported Rachel's stewardship completely. But the damage was done. Public opinion, which had swung in Rachel's favor after the custody hearing, now divided again. People who didn't understand nonprofit structures assumed the article's claims were true. Critics demanded investigations. And Strategic Mineral Acquisitions issued a public statement expressing concern about potential mismanagement of scientifically significant materials, suggesting the collection should be transferred to responsible institutions that could properly care for it. Rachel sat in Elena's living room reading the article over and over, feeling her carefully built confidence crumble. She'd done everything right, created a legitimate foundation with proper legal structure, hired experts to guide her, prioritized education and access over profit. And still, people with more power and better lawyers were finding ways to make her look incompetent and corrupt. Maybe they're right, Rachel said quietly. Maybe I'm not qualified for this. Maybe the collection would be better off with a university or museum. That's exactly what they want you to think, Elena said sharply. They want you to doubt yourself, to believe you don't deserve this, to hand over what's yours because fighting is too hard. But you know what, Rachel? Tomas didn't leave this to a university. He didn't leave it to a museum. He left it to you specifically because he believed you were strong enough to protect it and wise enough to share it. Don't prove him wrong. Patricia's response was more practical. We sue for defamation. The article made false claims that damaged your reputation and the foundation's credibility. We forced them to print a retraction and pay damages. Will that work? It'll be expensive and time-consuming for them. And it'll send a message that attacking you has consequences. Right now, they think you'll fold under pressure. We need to show them you won't. The defamation lawsuit was filed within 48 hours. Patricia included Strategic Mineral Acquisitions in the suit, claiming they provided false information to the journalist, knowing it would damage Rachel's reputation. The legal move was aggressive, risky, and exactly what Rachel needed. It shifted the narrative from defense to offense, making her the one taking action rather than constantly reacting to attacks. But the strain was wearing her down in ways that weren't visible from the outside. Rachel started having nightmares about losing the collection, about Lily being taken, about ending up back in that convenience store working night shifts with nothing to show for the brief moment when she'd had hope. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. She snapped at Lily over small things, then cried from guilt. She started avoiding phone calls because every ring might be another crisis, another person trying to take something from her or destroy what she was building. Elena noticed first. She sat Rachel down one evening after Lily had gone to bed and said gently, "You need help. Professional help. You're showing signs of trauma response, and that's not something you can just push through." "I'm fine," Rachel said automatically. "I just need to get through this legal stuff, then everything will calm down." "It won't calm down," Elena said. "Success doesn't make pressure disappear. It changes the kind of pressure you face. You went from poverty trauma to wealth trauma, and both of them break people if they don't get support." Rachel wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Elena was right. She wasn't fine. She was functioning, surviving, keeping all the plates spinning, but inside she was fracturing under stress that looked different from poverty but hurt just as much. Elena connected her with a therapist who specialized in sudden wealth trauma, a thing Rachel hadn't known existed until she was living it. The sessions helped, giving her tools to process the anxiety and fear without letting them paralyze her. But they also revealed something Rachel had been avoiding. She was afraid not just of losing the collection, but of deserving to lose it. Some part of her still believed that poor people didn't get to keep valuable things, that the universe would eventually correct this mistake and take back what it had temporarily given her. Tomas believed you deserve this, the therapist said. Your lawyers believe it. Your daughter believes it. The only person who doesn't believe it is you. Why is that? Because nothing good has ever stayed, Rachel admitted. Everything I've built gets taken away. My savings, my house, my marriage, my stability. Why should this be different? Because you're different now, the therapist said. You have resources and support. You have people fighting for you instead of against you. And most importantly, you have proof that you can protect something valuable. Every day you maintain the collection and build the foundation is proof that you deserve what you have. The words helped, but belief was harder than understanding. Rachel went through motions, did everything her team advised, fought every legal battle, and slowly watched the foundation grow despite the attacks. The educational programs expanded. The first research paper using data from Tomas's collection was published in a prestigious journal. 3 universities entered partnerships with the foundation to bring students for hands-on learning experiences. And slowly, incrementally, public opinion shifted back in Rachel's favor as people saw actual outcomes rather than just claims and counterclaims. Then came the discovery that changed everything again. Dr. Chun, who'd been conducting detailed analysis of the prime fragment, the glowing meteorite that Tomas had labeled as invaluable, found something that shouldn't exist. The fragment contained isotopes of elements that were only produced in supernova explosions, in combinations that suggested it had been present at the formation of multiple stellar systems. More than that, it contained organized crystalline structures that resembled information storage at a molecular level. It wasn't just a rock from space. It was potentially an artifact, a record created by something or someone unknown, sent through the cosmos and embedded in material that eventually became part of an asteroid that eventually struck Earth. The discovery made international headlines. Scientific communities that had been skeptical of Rachel's stewardship suddenly wanted access. The Vatican's Astronomical Observatory requested to study the fragment's theological implications. The UN convened a panel to discuss whether extraterrestrial artifacts required new international protocols. And overnight, Rachel went from managing a valuable collection to being the guardian of potentially the most significant discovery in human history. The pressure became unbearable. Rachel received calls from world governments, from billionaires offering absurd amounts of money, from scientific organizations demanding immediate access. The crater site was surrounded by media, by curiosity seekers, by protesters both supporting and opposing her right to control something so significant. Patricia hired additional security. Elena helped screen requests. And Rachel, exhausted and overwhelmed, made a decision that surprised everyone. She called a press conference and announced that the prime fragment would not be sold, would not be given to any single institution or government, but would be studied through an international consortium that included representatives from every major scientific organization willing to participate. The foundation would maintain custody and oversight, but access would be granted to any qualified researcher regardless of nationality, institutional affiliation, or ability to pay. It's not mine to keep or sell, Rachel said to the assembled press. It belongs to Earth, to humanity, to anyone curious about where we come from and whether we're alone in the universe. My job isn't to own it. My job is to protect it and make sure it's studied properly, transparently, without anyone having exclusive control. The announcement was praised by most scientific communities and condemned by governments and collectors who'd hoped to acquire exclusive rights. Strategic mineral acquisitions, seeing their last chance at ownership evaporate, made one final move that would test everything Rachel had learned about strength and protecting what mattered. The final move came on a cold morning in March, exactly 9 months after Rachel had first opened a frozen door in the crater. She was at the Foundation's newly established office in Flagstaff, reviewing research proposals with Elena, when Patricia called with news that made her blood run cold. Strategic Mineral Acquisitions had filed a lawsuit claiming that Tomas Reyes had stolen meteorite fragments from their family collection in 1962, that the entire crater collection was built on theft, and that all materials should be forfeit and transferred to them as the rightful owners. The claim was accompanied by documents that looked authentic, letters supposedly from Tomas to the Whitmore family, the original owners of Strategic Mineral Acquisitions, discussing meteorite trades and acquisitions that had gone wrong. "It's fabricated," Patricia said immediately. "It has to be." Tomas documented every fragment's origin meticulously. But the documents look real enough to force us into extended litigation. They're betting that the cost of defending against this, both financially and reputationally, will break you. That you'll settle rather than fight. How much would a settlement cost? Probably everything. They demand the entire collection or a percentage that makes keeping the Foundation impossible. And even if we win, which we will, the legal fees and time involved could drain resources you need for operations. They're not trying to win. They're trying to destroy what you've built by making it too expensive to maintain. Rachel sat in silence, staring at the research proposals in front of her. Scientists from 14 countries wanted to study the prime fragment. Students from 40 schools had applied for the Foundation's summer program. 3 new partnerships with universities were being finalized. Everything was working, growing, becoming exactly what Tomas had hoped for. And now someone was trying to burn it all down with lies dressed up as legal claims. "We fight," Rachel said quietly. "We fight and we win. Not just in court, but completely. I want them exposed, humiliated, destroyed the way they've tried to destroy me." Patricia was silent for a moment. "That's going to require something aggressive. Something risky. I'm listening. What if we don't just defend? What if we investigate them? Find out who's really behind Strategic Mineral Acquisitions, who's funding this lawsuit, what their real motivations are. If we can prove this is a coordinated attack rather than a legitimate legal claim, we flip the narrative. They become the criminals, not you. Can we do that? With the right investigators and enough money? Yes. It'll be expensive. I don't care about expensive anymore. I care about ending this so Lily can grow up without her mother constantly fighting legal battles. Do it. Do whatever it takes." Patricia hired a team of private investigators who specialized in corporate fraud. What they uncovered over the next 6 weeks was more extensive than anyone had anticipated. Strategic Mineral Acquisitions was a shell company. That much they'd already known. But the investigators traced its ownership through layers of holding companies and offshore accounts to reveal a network of individuals who'd been attempting to acquire meteorite collections for decades. The Whitmore family was part of it. Descendants of collectors who'd missed opportunities to acquire significant specimens and spent generations trying to reclaim what they saw as their lost heritage. But behind them were bigger players, corporations interested in the rare earth elements meteorites contained, governments wanting exclusive access to extraterrestrial materials for research, even a religious organization that believed the prime fragment contained divine messages. The forged documents claiming Tomas had stolen from the Whitmore family, created by a document specialist who'd been convicted of fraud in 2008 but was now working under a different name. The investigators found the digital files, the multiple drafts, the email chains discussing how to make the forgeries look authentic. Even better, they found communications between Strategic Mineral Acquisitions and Marcus, Rachel's ex-husband, discussing payment for his cooperation in pursuing custody and creating instability in Rachel's life. Every attack she'd faced, the custody challenges, the defamation article, the break-in attempt, all of it traced back to this coordinated effort to force her into a position where selling or surrendering the collection seemed like the only way to stop the pressure. Patricia assembled everything into a comprehensive legal filing that didn't just defend against the theft claims, but went on offense. She filed criminal complaints for fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and harassment. She included the evidence of document forgery, the financial trails, the communications proving coordination. And she sent copies to every major news outlet with a detailed explanation of how a single mother who'd inherited a meteorite collection had been systematically targeted by wealthy interests who believed they deserved what she'd been given. The story exploded in ways that made Rachel's previous media attention look minimal. This wasn't just about property rights or scientific access anymore. This was about class warfare, about powerful people trying to crush someone they saw as unworthy of wealth, about the lengths some would go to take what wasn't theirs. Public opinion swung decisively in Rachel's favor. Even people who'd previously questioned her qualifications now rallied to support her against what was clearly a coordinated attack. Strategic Mineral Acquisitions tried to withdraw their lawsuit, but Patricia blocked them, insisting it proceed so the fraud could be exposed in court. The hearing became a spectacle. The judge, a federal magistrate with no patience for corporate games, examined the evidence Patricia presented and grew visibly angry. "The documents you've submitted as evidence of theft," the judge said, addressing Strategic Mineral Acquisitions lawyers, "are forgeries created within the last year. The supposed letters from Tomas Reyes were written with ink that didn't exist in 1962 and paper produced in 2022. Your entire case is built on fabricated evidence. Do you have anything legitimate to present?" The lawyers had nothing. They stammered about good faith mistakes and misunderstandings, but the judge cut them off. "This case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. The individuals behind this fraud will face charges." And Ms. Torres, the judge added, "Looking at Rachel, I apologize that our legal system was weaponized against you in this way. Your response, creating a foundation and sharing this collection with the world while under constant attack, shows remarkable integrity. I hope you continue that work without further interference." The courtroom erupted in applause, which the judge allowed for a moment before gaveling for order. Rachel sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. She'd won. Not just won the case, but exposed the entire conspiracy, destroyed the people who tried to destroy her, proven in the most public way possible that she deserved what she had and had earned the right to protect it. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Rachel gave a brief statement that Patricia had prepared, thanking her legal team and the investigators and expressing hope that the collection could now be studied without distraction. But what she really wanted to say, what she kept inside until she was alone with Elena and Lily later that night, was simpler. "They tried to take everything from me," Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. "And I didn't let them. For the first time in my life, I didn't let them win." The criminal prosecution moved forward rapidly. The document forger was arrested and, facing serious charges, agreed to testify against everyone involved in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony unraveled the entire conspiracy, naming names, providing evidence, exposing the scope of the operation. The Whitmore family members who'd orchestrated the fraud were charged with multiple felonies. Several executives from companies that had funded Strategic Mineral Acquisitions faced corporate fraud charges. And Marcus, Rachel's ex-husband, was arrested for conspiracy and accepting payment to harass and intimidate his former wife. His carefully constructed image of a devoted father trying to reconnect with his daughter collapsed under the weight of evidence showing he'd been paid $50,000 to pursue custody specifically to create leverage against Rachel. Lily asked about it one evening as Rachel tucked her into bed. "Is Daddy going to jail?" Rachel had debated how much to tell her 7-year-old daughter, finally deciding on honesty tempered with age-appropriate explanation. "He might, baby. He did some things that were wrong, things that hurt people. Sometimes when adults make really bad choices, they have to face consequences." "Do you still love him?" Lily asked, her voice small. "He's your daddy. I love the person I thought he was," Rachel said carefully. "But that person maybe never really existed. The man your father actually is, the one who made these choices, I don't love him. But I don't hate him either. I just want him far away from us so we can be happy and safe. Is that okay?" Lily thought about it, then nodded. I think that's okay. I don't miss him anymore. That makes me sad, but I don't. That's okay too, Rachel said, kissing her forehead. You're allowed to feel however you feel. There's no wrong answer. The foundation flourished in the aftermath of the legal victories. Donations poured in from people who'd followed the story and wanted to support what Rachel had built. Universities that had been hesitant to partner, worried about the legal uncertainties, now competed for collaboration opportunities. The Vatican's Astronomical Observatory sent representatives to begin preliminary studies of the prime fragment. And the international consortium Rachel had created became a model for how significant discoveries could be managed cooperatively rather than competitively. Rachel hired staff, real professionals who knew how to run educational nonprofits and manage scientific collections. She learned from them, asking questions, absorbing knowledge, transforming from someone accidentally thrust into this role to someone genuinely capable of fulfilling it. She attended conferences on museum management and nonprofit governance. She took online courses in geology and planetary science so she could understand what researchers were discussing. And slowly, the imposter syndrome that had plagued her began to fade, replaced by confidence earned through actual competence. The Foundation's first anniversary was celebrated with an event that brought together everyone who'd helped Rachel survive the impossible year. Patricia, whose legal brilliance had defeated every attack. Elena, whose scientific expertise and personal support had kept Rachel grounded. Dr. Chun, who'd authenticated the collection and discovered its greatest secret. The investigators who'd unraveled the conspiracy. Even Sheriff Chun from Winslow, who'd provided early warnings about the Whitmore's intentions. And dozens of students who'd participated in the Foundation's programs, whose faces lit up when they talked about touching meteorites and learning about the cosmos. Rachel stood before them and tried to express what the year had meant. 12 months ago, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. I was working 3 jobs and sleeping in my car. I was being told I was worthless, that I didn't deserve the child I'd given everything to protect, that my struggles were my own fault. Then my uncle, a man I barely knew, left me something that changed everything. Not just the collection, though that's obviously significant, but the belief that I was worth investing in, that I could be trusted with something important, that my poverty didn't define my value. She paused, looking around the room at faces that had become family. This year has been the hardest of my life. Harder than the divorce, harder than the poverty, harder than anything I've experienced. Because suddenly I had something to lose. And people who want to take it from me because they believe they deserved it more than I did. They believed that wealth and power and family legacy gave them more right to this collection than the woman who actually inherited it. They were wrong. And everyone in this room helped prove they were wrong. The applause was thunderous. But Rachel wasn't finished. The Tomas Reyes Foundation exists because my uncle understood something important. That the most valuable thing you can give someone isn't money or property or even opportunity. It's belief. Belief that they matter, that they're capable, that they deserve good things. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And this foundation exists to pass that belief forward, to tell other kids like Lily, other single mothers like I was, other people who've been told they don't matter, that they do. That science and knowledge and wonder aren't reserved for the privileged. They belong to anyone curious enough to ask questions and brave enough to believe they deserve answers. The Foundation's work expanded in year 2. The educational programs grew to serve over 3,000 students annually. The research consortium published 15 papers using data from the collection, advancing understanding of stellar evolution and planetary formation in ways that wouldn't have been possible without access to Tomas's meticulous documentation. And Rachel, now confident in her role, began advocating publicly for changes in how scientific discoveries were managed, arguing that significant finds shouldn't automatically become government or institutional property, but should be handled in ways that balance public good with property rights. She testified before Congress about meteorite loss. She spoke at scientific conferences about ethical collection management. And she became, despite never intending it, a voice for people who'd been underestimated and overlooked. But the most meaningful changes were personal. Rachel bought a house, a real house with Lily's name on the deed alongside her own, ensuring that no matter what happened, her daughter would always have a home. She paid off every debt Marcus had left her with, not because she legally had to, but because she wanted the complete freedom of owing nothing to anyone. She established a trust fund for Lily's education, enough to cover any school she chose and graduate work if she wanted it. And she donated anonymously to the shelters and food banks that had helped her survive the worst months, remembering what it felt like to need help and have nowhere to turn. The crater site itself underwent transformation. The Foundation built a proper research facility near the rim, with laboratories and housing for visiting scientists. The frozen vault was maintained as Tomas had left it, but was now accessible to qualified researchers through a reservation system that ensured constant use without overcrowding. In the prime fragment, the glowing meteorite that contained possible messages from beyond Earth remained exactly where Tomas had placed it, studied regularly, but never moved, never owned, never claimed by anyone as exclusive property. Rachel visited the crater often, usually alone before dawn when the desert was quiet and the stars still visible. She'd stand at the rim looking down at the frozen door that had changed her life and think about the improbability of it all. A meteorite striking her uncle's property in 1962. Tomas spending 40 years protecting and documenting what it contained. The inheritance being timed perfectly to save Rachel when she needed it most. The thermal locks responding to human need in ways that seemed almost conscious. It was too perfect, too aligned to be pure chance. But if it wasn't chance, if there was some pattern or purpose to it, Rachel didn't know what it was and had stopped trying to figure it out. She just accepted that sometimes the universe balanced its books in unexpected ways, and that her job was to be worthy of the gift she'd received. Lily thrived in ways that made Rachel's heart ache with gratitude. She was 9 now, confident and curious, with none of the anxiety that had marked her earlier years. She discovered a passion for astronomy, spending hours at the crater's research facility talking with scientists about stellar evolution and planetary formation. She talked about becoming an astrophysicist someday, about studying the formation of solar systems, about maybe finding more meteorites that contained messages from distant worlds. And when other kids asked why she lived at a meteorite crater with her mom, she'd explain with perfect confidence that her great-great-uncle had been a genius who left them something important to protect, and that protecting important things was what their family did. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for his role in the conspiracy. He'd be eligible for parole in 12 months with good behavior. Rachel felt nothing when she heard the news. No satisfaction, no vindication, just indifference. He'd tried to destroy her and failed, and now he'd face consequences for that choice. But he was no longer relevant to her life or Lily's. He was just someone who'd made mistakes that cost him everything while trying to take what wasn't his. The Whitmore family fared worse. The primary conspirators received sentences ranging from 3 to 7 years. Their reputations, built over generations of collection and scholarship, were destroyed completely. The scientific community that had once respected them now viewed them as cautionary tales about what happened when entitlement and greed overwhelmed ethics and respect for the law. Strategic mineral acquisitions dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to Rachel for the legal costs of defending against their fraud. But Rachel didn't take satisfaction in their destruction either. She'd learned something important during the year of constant attacks. Revenge and vindication fell hollow compared to building something meaningful. She'd won not by destroying her enemies, but by creating something they couldn't touch, something that would outlast all of them. The Foundation would exist long after everyone involved in these battles was gone. Students would continue learning, researchers would continue discovering, and Tomas's legacy would continue growing. That was victory in a way that legal judgments and prison sentences could never match. 2 years after opening the frozen door, Rachel received a letter that made her understand her uncle's choices in a new way. It came from an elderly woman named Maria Santos, who explained that she'd been one of Tomas's few friends during his years in the desert. She'd respected his privacy and never pushed for information about what he was protecting, but she'd watched from a distance as he'd built something remarkable while the world dismissed him as a crazy hermit. "Tomas talked about you," Maria wrote. "Not often, but when he did, there was pride in his voice. He said you reminded him of himself at your age, stubborn and strong, but beaten down by people who should have protected you. He said that if he could give you what he'd built, what he'd protected for all those years, maybe your life would turn out better than his. He didn't want you to be alone the way he'd been alone. He wanted you to have resources and support and the ability to share what you'd been given rather than hiding it. I think he succeeded. I think he'd be proud of what you've built and how you've handled the attacks that came with it. And I think he'd want you to know that the loneliness he chose was his own decision, made for reasons he thought were right. But he didn't want that for you. He wanted you to let people in, to build community, to trust that some humans were worth trusting. I hope you found that to be true." Rachel read the letter 3 times, crying harder each time. Tomas had been lonely by choice, protecting his collection because he didn't trust anyone with it. But he trusted her, not just with the meteorites, but with the responsibility of doing better than he had, of sharing instead of hiding, of building community instead of isolating herself, of proving that something valuable could be protected without locking it away from the world. She'd done that. Not perfectly, not without struggles and mistakes and moments of doubt. But she'd done it. The Foundation's 3rd anniversary brought news that felt like vindication on a cosmic scale. The prime fragment, after years of study by scientists from 32 countries, was confirmed to contain organized information at a molecular level. The patterns weren't random. They were deliberate, structured in ways that suggested communication or record-keeping. What the information said remained unclear, translation of alien messages, assuming that's what they were wasn't. Something humanity had much experience with. But the confirmation that the fragment was artificial, that it had been created by something intelligent and sent through space to eventually reach Earth, changed everything. The discovery made international headlines for weeks. Religious leaders debated its theological implications. Scientists redesigned search parameters for extraterrestrial intelligence. Philosophers discussed what it meant that humanity's first contact with alien intelligence was through a message embedded in a meteorite rather than direct communication. And Rachel, who'd inherited this impossible thing by accident, became the guardian of potentially the most significant artifact in human history. The pressure of that responsibility was enormous, but she was ready for it now. She'd spent 3 years building systems and relationships and expertise. She'd proven she could handle attacks and protect what mattered. She'd transformed from someone who'd been told she was worthless into someone trusted with literal messages from beyond Earth. If that wasn't proof of her worth, nothing would be. The Foundation established new protocols for studying the prime fragment's information. International cooperation intensified, with governments and institutions that had previously competed now working together to decode what the patterns might mean. And Rachel, standing at the center of it all, made a decision that surprised even her closest advisors. She announced that any discoveries about the fragment's message would be shared immediately with the entire world, published openly rather than kept secret or released selectively. No government or institution would have exclusive access to whatever humanity learned from this artifact. It belongs to Earth, Rachel said at the announcement. Not to America, not to any one country or organization. If we've been given a message from beyond our world, everyone deserves to know what it says. Some people try to pressure her to reconsider, arguing that strategic information should be controlled, that potential technological applications needed to be protected, that not everyone could be trusted with whatever knowledge the fragment contained. Rachel listened patiently, then explained her position in terms that left no room for argument. For 3 years, people tried to take this from me because they thought they knew better than I did what should be done with it. They thought their power and wealth and education gave them more right to make decisions about Tomas's collection than the woman he chose to inherit it. They were wrong, and they're wrong now. I've spent 3 years proving I can be trusted with this responsibility. I've shared it with scientists and students and anyone curious enough to learn. I've fought off attacks and threats and conspiracies. I've built something that honors my uncle's legacy while making it accessible to the world. I'm not going to betray that now by deciding some people deserve knowledge more than others. Whatever we learn from that fragment gets shared with everyone immediately, freely. That's final. Her advisors accepted the decision, and most admitted privately that they admired her principles even when they worried about practical implications. But Rachel understood something they didn't. She'd been on the receiving end of systems that decided she didn't deserve things. She'd been told she was too poor, too uneducated, too damaged to be trusted with wealth or responsibility or even her own child. Every one of those judgments had been wrong. She wasn't going to become the kind of person who made similar judgments about others, who decided that some humans deserved access to knowledge while others didn't. Everyone deserved wonder. Everyone deserved to know they weren't alone in the universe, if that's what the fragment's message revealed. The Foundation's 5th anniversary was celebrated not with a single event, but with a week of activities. Student presentations about what they'd learned through the programs. A symposium on the fragment's message and the progress toward understanding it. A gala fundraiser that brought in $3 million for expanded operations. And a quiet ceremony at the crater itself, where Rachel, Elena, Patricia, and a few others who'd been there from the beginning gathered to remember Tomas and what he'd created. Rachel brought flowers, wildflowers from the desert that surrounded the crater, and placed them at the memorial plaque the Foundation had installed. Tomas Reyes, it read, scientist, guardian, believer in second chances. He spent 40 years protecting what others wanted to take. He gave it to someone who would share it with the world. She stood in silence, thinking about the uncle she'd barely known, about the lonely years he'd spent in this place, about the faith he'd had that she would be worthy of his gift. I hope I've made you proud, she whispered. I hope you're somewhere seeing what I've built with what you left me. I hope you know you saved my life and my daughter's life, and maybe, if that fragment contains what we think it does, change human history. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Lily was 13 now, a bright, confident teenager who'd grown up surrounded by scientists and students and people who believed knowledge was the most valuable thing humans could pursue. She just started high school, where she was already taking advanced placement courses in physics and mathematics. She talked about attending MIT or Caltech for college, about specializing in astrobiology, about dedicating her life to understanding what messages might be waiting in fragments of distant worlds. When her friends asked what it was like to live at a meteorite crater, she'd smile and say it was normal to her. Other kids had parents who worked normal jobs. She had a mom who'd inherited a meteorite collection and turned it into a foundation that changed science. That was just her life. But sometimes, late at night, when she couldn't sleep, Lily would ask Rachel about the early days, about what it had been like to be poor and desperate, about the convenience store and the 3 jobs and sleeping in the car, about the fear that they'd lose everything, about how it felt to open the frozen door and discover a fortune beyond imagination. Rachel always answered honestly, never sugarcoating the struggle or pretending it hadn't been as hard as it was. She wanted Lily to understand that wealth wasn't something you just had. It was something that came with responsibility and memory of what it was like to not have it. Did you ever think about keeping it all? Lily asked one night. About selling the collection and being rich without all the work of running a foundation? Every day at first, Rachel admitted. Every single day, I thought about how much easier it would be to just sell everything and disappear. But then I'd remember what Tomas wrote in his letter, that wealth without purpose is just another form of poverty. And I'd think about all the people like us, all the single mothers and struggling families and kids who'd been told they don't matter. And I'd realize that keeping everything for myself would make me just like the people who try to take it from me. People who thought they deserved things more than others. I didn't want to be that person. What if the message in the prime fragment says something terrible? Lily asked, what if it's a warning or a threat or something that scares people? Then people deserve to know that too, Rachel said. We can't only share the good news and hide the bad. That's not how trust works. Your great-great-uncle trusted me with something impossible. I trust the world to handle whatever we learn from it. That's the only way this works. Lily thought about that, then hugged her mother tightly. I'm proud of you, Mama. I know everyone says that, but I mean it. You could have been selfish and no one would have blamed you. But you weren't. That's why the foundation works, why people respect you, why all of this matters. You chose to be better than you had to be. Rachel held her daughter and felt something she'd never expected to feel. Peace. Not the absence of struggle or challenge, because the foundation continued to present both. But peace with who she'd become, with the choices she'd made, with the life she'd built from ruins. She was no longer the woman who'd worked 3 jobs and slept in her car. She wasn't defined by Marcus's betrayal or her own poverty or the system that had failed her. She was Rachel Torres, director of a foundation that had changed science and education. She was a mother whose daughter was confident and loved and safe. She was someone who'd been tested by every kind of pressure and had proven unbreakable. And she was, finally, enough exactly as she was. The foundation's work continued to grow. By year 7, they were serving 15,000 students annually. The research consortium had expanded to include institutions from 63 countries. 8 major discoveries in planetary science had come directly from studying Tomas's collection. And the prime fragment's message, slowly being decoded by teams of linguists, mathematicians, and AI specialists, was beginning to reveal patterns that suggested it might be a star map, a guide to other locations in the galaxy where similar artifacts might be waiting. If that was true, if the meteorite that struck Arizona in 1962 was one of many sent across the cosmos with directions to others, then humanity's understanding of its place in the universe was about to change fundamentally. And all of it traced back to one man who'd protected a collection for 40 years and one woman who'd honored his legacy by sharing it with the world. Rachel still visited the crater regularly, still stood at the rim before dawn watching the stars fade as the sun rose. But now she didn't come alone. Sometimes Lily joined her, and they'd talk about school and research and the future. Sometimes Elena came, and they discussed the latest scientific findings or challenges the foundation was facing. Sometimes it was Patricia, and they'd review legal situations or plan strategy for new partnerships. And sometimes it was students from the foundation's programs, kids who discovered they loved science and wanted to say thank you to the woman who'd made that discovery possible. Each visit reminded Rachel of how far she'd come. The crater that had seemed so alien and impossible when she'd first seen it 5 years ago now felt like home. The frozen door that had terrified her now stood open most days, welcoming researchers and students. And the collection that had been hidden for 40 years was now the center of international scientific cooperation. On a spring morning in the Foundation's 8th year, Rachel received a letter that made all the struggles and victories feel like preparation for something bigger. It was from the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, informing her that she and the Tomas Reyes Foundation had been awarded the Crafoord Prize in Geosciences for contributions to planetary science and for creating a new model of how significant discoveries could be managed for public benefit. The prize came with a monetary award of $600,000 in recognition as one of the most significant scientific achievements of the decade. Rachel sat with the letter in her hands, staring at words that meant someone, many someones believed her work mattered. Not just locally or nationally, but internationally. She'd gone from working a convenience store night shift to receiving one of the world's most prestigious scientific awards. She'd gone from being told she was worthless to being recognized as someone who'd changed her field. And she'd done it without compromising the principles Tomas had instilled in her. Share freely, protect fiercely, believe that knowledge belongs to everyone. The award ceremony in Stockholm was surreal. Rachel stood on stage in a dress Elena had helped her pick out, looking out at an audience that included some of the world's leading scientists, and tried to find words adequate to the moment. When I inherited a meteorite crater 8 years ago, she began, her voice carrying through the historic hall. I was a single mother working 3 jobs and sleeping in my car. I'd been betrayed by someone I trusted, told I was unfit to parent my own child. and left with nothing but debt and desperation. The inheritance that brought me here saved my life and my daughter's life. But more than that, it taught me something I'd forgotten or maybe never known. That your circumstances don't define your worth. That being poor or struggling or beaten down doesn't mean you don't deserve good things. That you can be trusted with responsibility even when people say you can't. She paused, looking at Lily in the front row, now 15 and brilliant, and everything Rachel had fought to protect. My uncle Tomas spent 40 years alone, protecting a collection because he didn't trust the world with it. He left it to me with the hope that I'd do better, that I'd find a way to share what he'd protected while keeping it safe from those who would exploit it. I tried to honor that hope. The foundation exists because one man believed in second chances and one woman decided to prove she deserved hers. She took a breath, steadying herself. This prize isn't just for me. It's for everyone who's been underestimated, overlooked, told they don't belong in spaces where decisions get made. It's for single mothers and struggling families, and anyone who's been crushed by systems that weren't designed to support them. It's proof that you can start with nothing and build something that matters, that you can be trusted with significant responsibility even when you've never had practice with it, that strength isn't about never falling, but about getting back up every single time. The ovation lasted 3 full minutes, and Rachel stood there letting it wash over her, accepting finally that she'd earned this recognition, not through luck or accident, but through 8 years of hard work, impossible decisions, and refusing to break under pressure that would have destroyed most people. That evening at the award dinner, Rachel sat beside a Nobel laureate in physics who asked her what was next for the foundation. More of what we're doing, Rachel said. More students, more research, more collaboration. We're planning a second facility in Chile to study meteorites from different orbital paths. We're establishing partnerships with universities in 20 new countries. And we're continuing to decode the prime fragments message, which gets more complex and fascinating the deeper we go. What if the message changes everything? The physicist asked. What if it rewrites human understanding of our place in the universe? Then we'll share that with the world immediately, Rachel said simply. Knowledge is meant to be spread, not hoarded. That's the whole point of what we've built. The physicist smiled. You know, there are people who say you're naive, that you should have monetized this, kept it private, maximized the financial return. I've heard, Rachel said. Those people don't understand that I've already maximized the return. Not in money, though the foundation is financially stable now, but in impact, in lives changed, in proving that someone like me could be trusted with something this important. That's worth more than any amount of money. Even the $600,000 from this prize is going straight into the foundation for scholarship programs. I don't need wealth. I need purpose. And I have that. The physicist nodded thoughtfully. Your uncle chose well. I think he understood something about human nature that most scientists miss. That the people who've had nothing are often the best guardians of something valuable because they understand its real worth. The foundation's 10th anniversary was approaching when Rachel received news that felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. The teams decoding the prime fragments message had achieved a breakthrough. The patterns weren't just a star map as they'd theorized. They were a message, readable, translatable, clearly intended for whoever found the fragment. The message was simple, almost disappointingly so. You're not alone. We were here. We left these for those who come after. Seek, learn, connect. That was all, repeated in mathematical and chemical patterns that allowed for translation into any symbolic language. No grand revelations about the meaning of life or technologies beyond human understanding. Just confirmation that somewhere, sometime, beings intelligent enough to send messages across the cosmos had existed and wanted future civilizations to know it. The news was released as Rachel had promised, immediately and freely to the entire world. The response was global and overwhelming. Some people found comfort in the confirmation that humanity wasn't alone in the universe. Others felt existential dread at the implications. Religious communities debated what it meant for their theological frameworks. Scientists celebrated the confirmation that intelligence arose elsewhere and wondered where the message's creators were now. But most people simply felt wonder, the kind of childlike amazement at discovering that the universe was bigger and stranger and more full of possibility than they'd imagined. And Rachel, standing at the crater rim on the morning the message was released, felt Tomas's presence almost tangibly. He protected this. He'd understood its importance even when he couldn't fully decode it. And he'd trusted her to handle this moment, to share this discovery in a way that honored its significance while making it accessible to everyone. She'd done it. She'd kept her promise to him. She'd proven worthy of his faith. The 10th anniversary celebration was held at the crater itself, with thousands of people attending, including students who'd gone through the Foundation's programs and were now studying science at universities around the world. Former students presented their research. Scientists discussed ongoing projects. And Rachel, surrounded by the community she'd built, felt something that had eluded her for most of her life: belonging. Lily, now 17 and about to start college at MIT studying astrophysics, gave a speech that brought Rachel to tears. "My mom," Lily said, standing at the podium with confidence that reminded Rachel of Elena, started with nothing. Less than nothing, actually, because she had debt and an ex-husband trying to take the one thing he hadn't already stolen, which was me. Then she inherited a crater and a collection, and everyone assumed she'd sell it. That she'd take the easy money and disappear. Because that's what people do when they've been poor, right? They grab whatever they can and run. She paused, looking at Rachel. But my mom didn't do that. She built something that mattered. She shared what she'd been given. She fought off people who tried to take it from her. And she proved that being poor doesn't mean you don't deserve nice things, or that you can't be trusted with responsibility. She proved that strength isn't about never struggling. It's about what you do after the struggle, how you use what you've been given, whether you become the kind of person who helps others or the kind who takes from them. The applause was thunderous, and Rachel stood to hug her daughter tightly. She'd done everything, every impossible thing, to protect this child and give her a future. And Lily had become someone remarkable, someone confident and brilliant and kind. Someone who understood that privilege came with responsibility and that the point of having resources was to help others access opportunities. That was the real inheritance, Rachel realized. Not the meteorites or the money or the recognition, but the lesson that you could survive impossible things and come out stronger, that you could be given something precious and honor it by sharing rather than hoarding, that your worst moments didn't have to define your future. She'd learned that lesson from Tomas, who'd been broken by betrayal but spent 40 years building something meaningful anyway. And now she'd passed it to Lily, who would carry it forward into whatever future she built. As the anniversary celebration wound down and the last visitors left the crater, Rachel stood alone at the rim watching the sun set over the desert. Behind her was the research facility, lights glowing in windows where scientists worked late on projects that would expand human understanding. Below her was the vault, the frozen door that had started everything. Now a portal through which thousands of people had passed to witness something extraordinary. And around her was silence, the vast desert quiet that Tomas had lived with for 40 years. She understood now why he'd chosen this isolation, not from fear or paranoia, but because some things required space and silence to properly appreciate their significance. The meteorite that had struck here 63 years ago had traveled for millions of years through space. The message it carried had been sent from beings who existed God knew when or where. And all of it had waited in the desert for someone to find it, protect it, and share it. That someone had turned out to be her, Rachel Torres, convenience store worker turned foundation director, broke single mother turned guardian of potentially the most significant discovery in human history. 10 years ago, she'd been working night shifts and wondering if she'd survive the next month. Now she stood at the center of international scientific cooperation, had raised a daughter who would probably make discoveries that changed the world, and had proven that sometimes the universe did balance its scales in unexpected ways. It wasn't fair that she had to suffer so much to get here. It wasn't fair that Tomas had spent 40 lonely years protecting his collection. It wasn't fair that people had tried so hard to take from her what she'd rightfully inherited. But fairness wasn't the point. The point was what you did with what you were given, whether that was poverty or betrayal or a meteorite crater. You either let it destroy you, or you used it to build something that mattered. Rachel had chosen to build, and what she'd built would last long after she was gone, continuing to educate and inspire and remind people that their circumstances didn't define their worth. That was legacy. That was purpose. That was enough. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.